Hello everyone, Hawke here, and today I'm going to be talking about one of the biggest problems in political discourse, and also in understanding how the left has sort of controlled the narrative for the last 80 years, and that is the fact that there is actually no such thing as a centrist. Now, I know what a lot of people are thinking, but Hawke, you have the far right, the far left, and then you've got all these people in the middle that are the centrists. That's just not true. Not true at all. Now, when we think of the political spectrum, we think of this long line with points at each end, and at these points are like the furthest of the radical ideologies, obviously communism, and then mid-century Germans. And that would be true if that political spectrum was actually the full political spectrum. Now, the thing that the left did perfectly, and this is actually a very good piece of skill by them, was they took control of the narrative of political discourse after World War II. Now, the political spectrum isn't actually a line. It's more like a Jackson Pollock painting. There's bits and bobs all over the place, and you've got splodges of ideologies that overlap with certain ones and don't overlap with other ones, and everywhere's all over the place, and you can't really cram them down in any specific way. And this is why you start to see, obviously, fractions and infighting in groups you think should be together. Now, what happened after World War II was, obviously, the radical left, the communists, realised that for a short period of time they could be classed as the good guys. And with them infiltrating academia and, the institutions, what they did is they compressed everything into a line, whereas they put themselves on one end and their opposition, who were the mid-century Germans, at the other end. Now, by doing this, they could decide how far they went. And what they did was they placed the mid-century Germans still at the left wing end of the full spectrum, pretty much cutting it off and allowing the discourse to stay in a bubble almost. Now, by doing this, what they did was they ensured that all discourse would eventually lead to what they wanted. So you'd have the communists saying something very radical in the 1950s, and then people would go like, well, I don't agree with that, but I don't want to be a class as a mid-century German, a Nazi, and so they go to the centrist position. Now, this centrist position is still incredibly liberal. It still follows pretty much 99% of the left-wing ideology. It's just the fact that it isn't as far along. Now, you're probably thinking, yeah, but there's loads of people who are centrists who are shunned by the left wing, and they don't have anything in common, and they actively go against them. Well, what actually happens is a centrist is most of the time, pretty much 99% of the time, a leftist who is 10 to 15 years behind the radicals. So what we're seeing is, as time's progressed, the communists and the radical left have been able to keep claiming that certain things are equal to what the Nazis would want, and as such it has moved the term Nazi along the political spectrum, and that has also moved the centrists further and further along, more to the left, and obviously the radicals are so way out that you can't even, well, they're gone. And so what it's going to is move discussion leftwards constantly for the last 80 years. And this is why we're reaching a point where the far right is now being is saying stuff that a Democrat would say in the 90s. This is why people like J.K. Rowling are now classed as far right, because they've disagreed with one thing in the on the left, and they've been pushed over to, say, our side. And you start to realise that actually no, these aren't. J.K. Rowling's not a Nazi in any way, shape or size, and by understanding the fact that the left have controlled political discourse by creating this version of the political spectrum in which they've, I wouldn't say brainwashed, but they've gaslit people into thinking that a clearly left-leaning position is somehow centrist. What they've done is they've controlled the they control the discourse, and they've sort of moulded the world into a place where they can't actually lose. And the reason they can't actually lose is, no matter how radical they are now, they know that in 10 years' time, the moderates will eventually catch up with them. Like, you can see people who we'll call them liberals in the 90s, who are now pushing things that even the radicals weren't saying in the 90s. So when you come and look at it like as a political theory, centrism just collapses completely. And the vast majority of the time, if you speak to a centrist, you can clearly see that they are a leftist, but they'll disagree with either trans or well, to be honest with you, it is mainly the trans stuff and a slight disagreement on migration policy. And so what you're seeing is almost, especially in most right-wing movements, is almost them trying to smash down the wall of Nazism, I'll say, so that the rest of the political spectrum can sort of be got at, because that's the point of the term Nazi, which they use, is to try and keep us penned in, or keep the discourse penned into this very small section of the spectrum, in which you really ended up with, you've got the choices of communism but a little bit later, or maybe communism but will eventually become centrist to then become communist. So if you can kind of get your head around that, you can start seeing how really political discourse breaks down into the left versus the right. And this is why certain things you'll notice that were perfectly okay 5-10 years ago are now classed as far right, because the whole idea is eventually to get the centre to become so radical in the future, whereas in 10 years' time you'll see the centre being the groups who are saying right now, yes, we'll allow children to transition whenever, we'll be, anyone can be anything, or whatever the left is saying now, or whatever the far left is saying now, will in 10 years' time become the centrist position, because that's how the system that's how the system they've created works. And I know people are going to start saying, no, the centrists, we take bits and bobs from both sides, and we try and make a decision for ourselves, and we try to keep everything moderate. The reality is the centrists will always disavow the right winger. They will always find the excuse for the left winger to agree with them, until it comes to something that is too radical for them. Said radical thing, as I said, they'll start agreeing eventually, but they'll always distance themselves from the right wing straight away, no questions asked. but with the left there'll be a bit more understanding, and they'll never punch leftwards until it's something that society as a whole hasn't quite accepted yet. Whereas with the right, whatever the right says, they all quickly go, no, we're not doing that, because I don't want to be classed as a mid-century German. And this is something that obviously people on the right have got to start understanding when they come across people in discourse, that the centrists, you have to admit, they're never going to be on our side. They're never going to agree with what we say, because, like I say, they are just leftists who are a couple of years behind, and they've been gaslit into thinking that they're a moderate position, when in reality they're still an incredibly left-wing position. And so what this video is really about is saying centrism doesn't exist. They do not exist. There are no centrists. They do not exist. You will find straight away, once push comes to shove and they are forced to actually think about their views, they will drift to the left, and then you'll find yourself just against another leftist. And we're starting to see this more and more now that, say, over here in the UK, that Restore Britain has come out, that a lot of people who claim to be right-wing are just liberals. They're just lefties. They're just people who couldn't keep up, got shoved into the right-wing sphere, and reality is once an actual right-wing party comes along, someone who's not going to stick to the actual the bubble that's been created, everyone starts panicking and they start going, well, actually no, I'm actually over here, and all that. And over in America, I think you're starting to well, you've seen it quite clearly with everything, because people like Trump were just saying 90s Democrat things, and obviously that is now classed as far right and radical, when in reality it's not. But as the system has been created, 90s leftism needs to be classed as radical now, so that the centre can move further to the left to help the process. And really, you really do have to hand it to the left to be able to have controlled the system, and mould it into what they wanted. They knew the assignment, and they moulded it into what they needed, and they did it so perfectly. I can't. I'd like people to just understand how well they did. That they were able to mould political discourse so perfectly that they could not lose. They could not lose until somebody bashed the door down, because it was a perfect little bubble that they had created. And like I say, I don't usually like promoting the left, and I don't usually like talking nice about them, but man, you have to give it to them. They really played the blinder. It was the perfect system to make sure that whatever happened in any elections, whatever happened in any discourse, the outcome would be a movement to the left. Every single government moved more and more to the left, no matter who they were voted in for, or what they were voted in for, or who was leading them, or anything like that. Every single government moved further to the left. Every single discussion, every single idea kept moving to the left, because the left controlled the political spectrum. They decided what the ends were, and they decided that the ends were left, still left, and just a little bit less left, and they held it in there. And this is why things like the horseshoe theory started popping up, and people were thinking, oh well, they're just as bad as each other. When in reality, what was happening was it was just the left wing versus the left wing, and the reason why they were so close together is because it was built to not be that different. It was built to the point where the radical right party would eventually be just a leftist, but they'd be called racist every so often, and that was it. So that's my little theory on why the centrism just doesn't exist, and why you have to understand that the post-war consensus was moulded so that the left would never lose, and we've got to be able to break out of that. And until we break out of that, we're going to be stuck in the same loop of the same ideas, the same parties, the same people, the same issues. And even the left are realising that things are just going, tits up. And the situation's getting bad, because even the left are starting to go, we've got to step up and we've got to change something, because the paradigm isn't stable anymore. It's not going to last. And they've realised certain people are waking up and they're trying to push rightwards to make change, and the people who are trying to it's very complicated. It's very, very complicated, but you've got certain people who are so gaslit into the system that they'll never come out of it, and they'll always think that centrists exist, that we're just in the middle, when reality is, you're in the middle, but that middle is way to the left. So we're here, the political spectrum keeps going and going and going and going, just gone, and you're here going, well, I'm in between these 2 points. And it's like, but there's more and more points. So that's my the theory on centrism, and why centrism doesn't exist. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, just put a like down there. I'm not going to ask anyone to subscribe, because why the hell would you subscribe to a guy who just rambles in front of a camera with zero budget? But just put a like, put a comment down what you think, and anything you'd like me to talk about in the future, because I'm trying to find more stuff to talk about, because unfortunately politics is just going round and round in a circle right now. There's very little new to discuss. There's certain situations that are new, but the basic ideas behind them are pretty much the same. There's only so many times you can talk about something new, about, say, bombing in the Middle East, or a protest march, or clashes or something. There's a set amount of things. So I'd like to see what people would like me to talk about, and I'll see what I can do. But until then, you take care, keep yourself safe, and I'll see you on the next video. Hawke out.